What would you do if the two people you trusted most shredded your life in your own bed? Forgive them or let them burn? Lydia Harper faced that question on a sun-drenched Tuesday in June, clutching a greasy bag from Rudy's Diner and a six-pack of IPA, her hands trembling with a secret. 5 months pregnant, a truth she hadn't dared share with her cheating husband, Ethan Pierce. She'd slipped out of work early, chasing a fragile hope to mend their unraveling marriage, only to catch a whiff of lavender taunting her from the hall. A scent that screamed her sister Samantha's presence. Option 1, confront and heal. Option 2, revenge and run. Comment your choice, 1 or 2, below. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Revenge Story, Graceful Revenge. If you love stories of resilience, reclaiming justice with style, and rediscovering your worth, hit that subscribe button for Graceful Revenge now. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Let's dive into the power of elegant revenge and life's deepest lessons together. Lydia Harper eased the front door open, stepping into their suburban Missouri home. The faint creak of hardwood under her flats swallowed by a stillness that pressed against her chest like a clenched fist. The house, a 2-story fixer-upper they'd bought 5 years ago, had once been her pride. Its chipped white paint and sagging porch, a canvas for dreams she'd woven with Ethan. They'd spent their first summer here sanding floors, arguing over paint swatches, laughing as they smeared blue streaks on each other's faces during late-night renovations. She'd planted marigolds along the walkway, their golden blooms a promise of stability after years of renting cramped apartments. Now, those flowers wilted in the heat, and the house felt like a stranger's lair, its warmth leached away by months of Ethan's late nights at the accounting firm and her own buried doubts. A quiet dread she'd masked with extra hours sketching blueprints at her design job, pretending the cracks in their marriage weren't widening beneath her feet. She set the bag on the counter, its crinkle slicing through the silence, and glanced at the entryway. There sat Samantha's black combat boots, scuffed at the toes, laces tangled in a messy knot, relics from her college days when she'd strutted around campus like she owned every room she entered, her laughter a siren call that drew eyes and envy. 3 months ago, Sam had shown up on their doorstep, mascara streaked and suitcase in hand, her voice trembling as she begged a soft landing after a bartender dumped her in a haze of bar tabs and broken promises. Lydia had hesitated, her gut twisting at the sight of her younger sister's tearful plea, but she'd relented, shoving down the unease that flared every time Sam lingered too long in the kitchen, giggling at Ethan's dumb puns over morning coffee, or draped his faded blue hoodie over her shoulders like it was hers to claim. "Just for job hunting," Sam had said about the boots, flashing that crooked grin Lydia had once found charming. A grin that had coaxed her into sharing toys, secrets, and forgiveness through years of sibling squabbles. Now, that grin was a warning etched in the dust coating the boots after weeks of stillness. A silent alarm Lydia had ignored, telling herself it was sisterly duty to offer shelter, not suspicion. A memory clawed up, sharp and unbidden. Sam, at 14, sneaking into their shared bedroom in Springfield, pilfering Lydia's diary from its hiding spot under the mattress. She'd read it aloud at a sleepover, cackling as Lydia's cheeks burned, her private words about a boy named Tommy, exposed to a gaggle of giggling girls sprawled across sleeping bags. "It's just fun, Lyd." "Lighten up," Sam had said, dodging their mom's half-hearted scold with a wink, her dark hair bouncing as she twirled away. That was their rhythm, a dance carved into their childhood. Sam took what she wanted: clothes, secrets, the spotlight, and Lydia gave swallowing her anger because love was the frayed thread stitching her silence, a role she'd played since she was old enough to understand their parents' pride in her quiet compliance. Their dad would nod approvingly, "Lydia keeps the peace," while their mom fussed over Sam's latest antics, her voice soft, "She's just spirited. Let her be." She'd spent her youth as the good sister, the one who didn't make waves, and that shadow had trailed her into adulthood, binding her to a duty she couldn't shake. "Ethan!" she called, her voice thin and hesitant, swallowed by the stillness of the house. No answer came, only a pulsing synth track drifting down from upstairs, its bass line thrumming like a heartbeat out of sync with her own, a rhythm that felt foreign in the space they'd once filled with shared playlists and late-night talks. She climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, the lavender scent thickening into a cloying fog that clung to her skin, her clothes, her lungs. A cheap body spray Sam had worn since they were teens. A scent that once meant giggling under blankets with flashlights, swapping dreams about boys and freedom. Now it was an invasion, a marker of territory Lydia hadn't agreed to cede, a violation that pricked her nerves as she gripped the banister, her knuckles whitening. The bedroom door hung ajar, a sliver of warm light piercing the dim hallway like a blade cutting through the haze. Lydia nudged it open with her elbow, the beer bottles cold and slick against her arms, and froze. Time shattered into jagged pieces she couldn't reassemble, a mosaic of betrayal she'd never unsee. Sam lounged on their bed, the bed where Lydia had curled up with Ethan on countless nights, whispering dreams about a future family, tracing baby names in the dark, Emma, Liam, Sophie, imagining the child now growing inside her, a secret she'd held close, waiting for the right moment to share. Sam wore Ethan's gray t-shirt, a third anniversary gift Lydia had picked because it matched his hazel eyes, the one he'd worn when they'd painted this room together, laughing as paint splattered their jeans, his hands brushing hers as they smoothed the walls. Her bare legs were crossed casually, her damp hair twisted into a messy bun, her skin flushed with a post-shower glow that made Lydia's stomach lurch, bile rising in her throat. Sam didn't flinch when Lydia appeared, didn't even blink, just smirked, her green eyes glinting with a cruel, triumphant edge Lydia had seen too many times before. A look that said she'd won something Lydia hadn't known was up for grabs. "Where's Ethan?" Lydia's voice came out flat, mechanical, a stranger's voice that didn't belong to the woman she'd been an hour ago, the woman who'd thought a burger and a beer could stitch up the fraying seams of their marriage, could remind Ethan of the life they'd built before the silences grew too loud. Sam tilted her head toward the bathroom door, where steam spilled out in lazy curls, thick and suffocating, a haze that blurred the edges of the room. "Showering," she said, her tone casual, almost bored, as if sitting half naked in her sister's bed were just another Tuesday afternoon, a mundane footnote in the tangled, messy script of their lives. The words barely sank in before the bathroom door creaked open, a slow groan that echoed in the tense silence like a hinge protesting its own betrayal. Ethan stepped out, a towel slung low around his hips, water dripping from his dark hair onto the hardwood floor, leaving little pools that glinted in the light like shards of broken trust scattered at his feet. His eyes locked on hers, wide with panic, then darted to Sam as if she'd throw him a lifeline to pull him out of the mess he'd plunged into head first. "Lydia," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his own guilt. It's not what it looks like." She laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that sliced through the humid air, echoing off the walls like a gunshot in a quiet room, raw and unhinged, a release of the pressure that had built inside her for months. "Really?" she said, her voice rising, trembling with disbelief and a pain she couldn't name, a wound too deep to touch. "Not what? My sister half naked in our bed, you dripping wet from her shower?" The bag and bottles slipped from her grasp, one shattering on the floor in a spray of amber foam that hissed and spread across the hardwood, the sound reverberating like a bomb detonating in the wreckage of her life, glass glinting like the fragments of her trust. Sam stretched lazily, her smirk unwavering, her posture smug and unapologetic, a queen on a throne she'd stolen without a flicker of remorse. "It just happened, Lyd. Chill out," she said, her voice smooth as silk, laced with a condescension that ignited Lydia's blood, a fire roaring through her veins. Ethan took a step forward, hands raised like he could ward off the truth crashing down around them, his towel slipping slightly as he moved. "We were just talking, I swear," he pleaded, his words stumbling over each other, weak and desperate, a flimsy shield against the reality staring him in the face. "Talking?" Lydia roared, her voice breaking, the word foreign and absurd on her tongue, a laughable lie that fueled the inferno inside her. "In our bedroom? With her in your shirt? Fresh from a shower together? Don't lie to me, Ethan. Not now. Not after everything." He flinched, shoulders hunching, and glanced at Sam again, his eyes pleading for her to back him up, to weave some flimsy excuse he could cling to like a drowning man to driftwood. She didn't. She just watched, that smirk still plastered on her face, her posture relaxed, as if this were a game she'd already won. A chess match where she'd claimed the king and left Lydia with nothing but pawns, her victory assured in the tilt of her head, the glint in her eyes. A memory stabbed through the haze, cutting deeper than the scene before her. Ethan at a county fair 9 years ago, winning her a stuffed bear with a crooked grin, his arm slung around her as the Ferris wheel spun above them, the night air thick with the smell of popcorn and cotton candy. He'd pulled her close under a sky bursting with stars, his breath warm against her ear, and whispered, "You're my forever, Lyd. I'd never hurt you." She'd believed him, her heart swelling as she clutched that bear, building a life on that promise. Nights cooking pasta in their first apartment, sauce splattered on the counter as they danced to old jazz records. Mornings tangled in sheets, sunlight streaming through cracked blinds. Dreams of a family whispered under starlit skies on their back porch, her hand in his as they planned a nursery they'd never paint. They'd spent hours in this room, picking out the oak headboard, hanging photos from their first trip to the Ozarks, Ethan grinning by the campfire, Lydia laughing as marshmallows caught fire. Now, that bear moldered in the attic, buried under boxes of forgotten keepsakes, and his promise was dust scattered across the floor, mingling with the foam from the broken bottle, a testament to the lie she'd lived. Grief, not rage, snapped inside her, a hollow, suffocating ache that stole her breath, leaving her gasping in the ruins of her trust, the air too thick to draw into her lungs. She turned and bolted, her sneakers thundering down the stairs, the walls closing in like a trap ready to crush her under its weight. She didn't grab her purse or phone, just her keys from the counter, her fingers fumbling as they closed around the cold metal, and tore out of the house, the front door slamming behind her with a bang that rattled the windows, a final echoing note in the symphony of her collapse. The car roared to life, tires screeching as she peeled out of the driveway, the tidy lawns and picket fences of their suburban street blurring into a smear of green and white as she floored the gas, fleeing the wreckage of the life she'd known. The home she'd built with love, now a tomb for her shattered illusions. She drove for hours, aimless, The highway stretching out like an endless wound she couldn't suture, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields and towns she didn't recognize. The sun sank into a blood-red horizon, casting long shadows across the road that danced like ghosts of the future she'd lost. A future with Ethan by her side, a child in her arms, a family she'd dreamed of since the day those two pink lines appeared on the test she'd taken alone in their bathroom, her heart pounding with hope she hadn't yet shared. Her mind replayed the scene on a relentless, torturous loop. Sam's smirk, Ethan's guilty stare, the steam curling from the bathroom like a confession written in the air. But it wasn't the only image that haunted her. Another memory surfaced, softer but no less painful. Sam at 10, braiding Lydia's hair for a school play in their cramped Springfield bedroom, her small fingers deft and gentle, giggling as she tucked a daisy behind Lydia's ear. "You're the prettiest sister ever," she'd said, her eyes bright with a sincerity Lydia had clung to through years of petty fights and stolen moments, a bond she'd thought unbreakable. That girl was gone, replaced by this stranger who'd taken everything, her husband, her home, her trust, leaving only ashes in her wake, a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife because it came from blood, from the sister she'd loved through every storm. She pulled into a truck stop off I-70 as dusk settled over the landscape, hands shaking as she killed the engine, the hum fading into the distant rumble of semis and the chirp of crickets in the warm night air. The betrayal wasn't just loud, it was deafening, a tidal wave that drowned every shred of hope she'd clung to, every plan she'd made for the child Ethan didn't even know about, the child she'd imagined cradling in this house, in that bed now defiled by their lies. She checked into the Starlight Inn, a dingy motel with flickering neon and stained carpets that reeked of mildew and regret. The kind of place where broken people hid from the world, licking wounds they couldn't name. The clerk barely looked up as she handed over cash, her fingers trembling around the crumpled bills, and she shuffled to her room, the key rattling in her hand. She used the front desk phone, its cord twisted and grimy, to call Tessa, her best friend since college, the only person she could trust not to judge her when she fell apart completely, the only lifeline she had left in a world that had just collapsed. "I need a place to crash," she rasped, her voice raw, barely holding together as the words clawed their way out of her throat, each syllable a shard of glass cutting deeper. Tessa didn't hesitate, her voice sharp with fury that crackled through the line like a storm breaking. "Get over here now! What the hell happened?" "I caught them," Lydia managed, the words tasting like bile, bitter and burning in her throat, a poison she couldn't spit out fast enough. "Ethan and Sam, in our bed." Tessa unleashed a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush, her anger a thunderclap that steadied Lydia's fraying nerves. "I'll kill them both, slowly, with my bare hands. My door's open, get here, now." Lydia didn't sleep that first night at Tessa's, her body buzzing with adrenaline, a live wire sparking in the dark of the guest room, its beige walls and soft quilt a stark contrast to the chaos inside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sam's smirk, heard Ethan's pathetic excuses, "It's not what it looks like," and wanted to scream until her throat bled, until the sound shattered the silence that pressed down on her chest like a slab of concrete. It didn't just happen. They'd planned it, reveled in it, laughed behind her back while she played the fool, pregnant and oblivious, chopping vegetables for dinners they ate together, folding his laundry while he slipped upstairs with her sister, her blood, her betrayer. She lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning lazily above her, its hum a futile lullaby against the storm in her mind. Tessa had left a mug of chamomile tea by the door, a sticky note scrawled in her jagged handwriting. "Talk when you're ready. I'm here." It was that small act. The tea, the note that broke her, tears spilling hot and silent down her cheeks, soaking the pillow as she curled into herself, a dam bursting after years of holding back. By morning, she filed for divorce, dragging herself to the courthouse in Tessa's borrowed jacket, the paperwork a cold, mechanical act that felt like signing away her past, her dreams, her faith in the people she'd loved most, a signature that severed 9 years in a single stroke. But revenge ignited beneath the surface, a dark flame licking at her thoughts, promising a reckoning she couldn't yet define, a fire that burned hotter with every memory of Sam's smirk, Ethan's lies. Ethan texted pleas through the night, his messages lighting up her phone from numbers she didn't recognize. "I messed up, Lyd. Take the house, the savings, everything. I'm so sorry." A pitiful litany of guilt she read with a sneer, her fingers hovering over the block button, but not pressing it. Not yet, letting his words fuel the blaze inside her. A week later, his lawyer called, voice slick and demanding, insisting on half of everything: the house with its marigold walkway, the accounts she'd built through late nights sketching designs for clients who didn't care, even her car, a beat-up Toyota she'd driven since grad school when they were broke and dreaming of a future now ashes. Lydia knew Sam was behind it, pulling strings like she always had, whispering in his ear about what he deserved, what they could build on the ruins of her life. Her sister's voice, a venomous echo she could hear even through the phone's static. She drained their joint account that same day, $47,000 wired to a new one in her name, every cent hers by right and sweat, her fingers trembling as she punched in the transfer code, a small victory that tasted like iron on her tongue. She hired Greg, a ruthless lawyer Tessa swore by, a man with a shark's grin and a reputation for leaving opponents in tatters. His office a cramped room stacked with files and the faint smell of cigarette smoke. "Make them bleed," she told him, her voice cold as steel, her hands clenched into fists until her nails bit into her palms, leaving crescent marks she didn't feel. He nodded, adjusting his tie with a gleam in his eye that promised destruction, a predator scenting blood. "Consider it done," he said, and she believed him, a flicker of power sparking in her chest for the first time since she'd walked into that bedroom and seen her world collapse. She moved out before the hearing, fleeing Missouri for Minneapolis, a city far enough to bury the past, its gray winters a mirror to the ache that settled into her bones like damp rot, a cold that seeped through her skin and stayed. The studio apartment she rented was a shoebox, peeling wallpaper in a sickly yellow, a single window overlooking a snow-choked alley where stray cats prowled, a mattress on the floor because she couldn't afford more after the lawyer fees ate through her savings. She unpacked only essentials: a kettle, a few chipped mugs, a stack of sweaters, leaving boxes stacked against the wall, their contents a reminder of a life she couldn't face, a life packed away in cardboard tombs labeled with a marker she'd borrowed from the landlord. The first night, she sat on the mattress, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the wall as snowflakes tapped the glass, each one a whisper of the silence she'd sought but couldn't bear. She'd left behind the marigolds, the photos, the bed, everything that tied her to Ethan and Sam, everything that screamed of the family she'd lost before it could begin. A month later, miscarriage struck, a quiet, brutal loss that unfolded in the sterile white of her bathroom, blood swirling down the drain as she sat on the cold tile. A silent scream trapped in her chest. Her hands pressed against a belly that no longer held a future. The future she'd guarded in secret, waiting for a moment that never came. "Stress-induced," the doctor said, his voice clinical, detached, scribbling on a chart while she nodded, staring at the ceiling, feeling the loss like a second betrayal. A wound they'd inflicted without ever knowing. A child Ethan would never mourn because she'd never told him. A secret she'd kept to protect it from his indifference. The clinic was a blur of white coats and antiseptic. The nurse's pitying glance, a sting she ignored as she pulled her coat tighter, walking out into the snow with a prescription she'd never fill. She didn't tell Tessa, not yet, carrying the grief alone, a weight that bowed her shoulders as she shuffled back to the studio, her boots crunching through the ice, her breath fogging in the frigid air. She got a job at a small design firm, sketching blueprints for office buildings and strip malls she'd never see built. The work a quiet, mindless refuge where she could disappear into lines and angles, a shield against the chaos they'd left behind, a way to fill the days that stretched empty before her. Her desk became a chaos of coffee mugs, pencils, and crumpled drafts. Her days a blur of measurements and deadlines. Her nights a battle with silence in an apartment that echoed with absence. The hum of a radiator her only company. She ate takeout from styrofoam containers, greasy noodles, cold pizza, the TV flickering with shows she didn't watch, the sound a desperate attempt to drown out the thoughts that clawed at her. Memories of Ethan's laugh as he flipped pancakes on Sundays, Sam's teasing grin as they baked cookies at Christmas, the baby she'd lost before it could cry, its heartbeat a fleeting pulse she'd felt in secret, a rhythm now stilled forever. She'd walk the snowy streets after dark, scarf pulled tight against the wind, her boots leaving tracks that vanished under fresh powder, seeking the numbness that promised escape, a void where feelings used to live, where she didn't have to face the hollow space where her child should have been, where her trust should have stood unbroken. 2 months after the divorce, Sam posted on Instagram, Ethan's arm slung around her, her dark hair spilling over his shoulder, a cheap neon sign glowing live music behind them at some dive bar, their smiles a mockery of the life they'd stolen. The caption dripped with smugness. "Found my forever." She tagged Lydia, a deliberate jab, a middle finger in pixels that hit harder than any punch, twisting the knife they'd already buried in her back, a taunt that echoed through the screen and into the quiet of her studio. Lydia stared at it, her hands trembling, not with heartbreak, but with rage, a white-hot fury that burned through the fog and lit something dangerous inside her. A spark she hadn't felt since the day she'd fled. A fire that roared for justice, for retribution. She deleted the app, blocked Sam's number, and cut her parents off when they tried to play peacemaker over the phone, their voices crackling through the line like static from a dead era she'd left behind. "Sam's happy, Lyd," her mom pleaded, her tone thick with tears. The same tone that had cooed over Sam's every tantrum, every victory, as if happiness excused betrayal. "Can't you let it go? She's your sister. She's family." Her dad just grunted, his usual refrain. "Life's messy. Deal with it." She hung up, the line going dead with a click that felt like a guillotine falling, severing the last tether to the people who'd chosen Sam over her, who'd excused every wound with a shrug and a platitude, their voices fading into the silence she'd claimed as her own. Revenge took root, a slow-growing vine that wrapped around her thoughts, tightening with every passing day, its thorns sharp and unyielding, a promise of justice she nurtured in the dark. She created a fake account, Jane Doe MN, lurking on their socials, watching their lives unfold like a twisted play she hadn't bought a ticket for, but couldn't look away from, a voyeur to the wreckage they'd built on her ruins. Ethan landed a job at a car dealership in St. Louis, posting about sales quotas with a forced enthusiasm that didn't reach his eyes. His profile picture, a strained smile that hid the cracks she knew were splintering beneath his facade. Cracks she'd widen, she vowed, her fingers itching over the keyboard. Sam flaunted new clothes, silk dresses, leather boots, too expensive for a jobless drifter. Weekend trips to Chicago, rooftop selfies with cocktails, a life built on the ashes of Lydia's trust, funded by Ethan's paycheck and her own reckless spending, a parade of excess that mocked every sacrifice Lydia had made. She dug deeper, tracking their moves, her nights spent hunched over her laptop in the dim glow of the studio, coffee going cold as she pieced together their fragile empire. Her eyes burning from the screen, but refusing to rest. She found Sam's flirty comments on other men's posts, married men, co-workers, a bartender with a handlebar mustache, screenshots piling up in a folder labeled Reckoning, each one a bullet she'd load into her arsenal. She sent an anonymous email to Ethan's boss. "Your salesman's personal life is a liability. Ask about his girlfriend's habits." And smirked as his posts vanished for weeks, his online silence a small cut that bled satisfaction, a taste of the chaos she could unleash with a single click. But it wasn't enough. She wanted more, a strike that would hit harder, leave scars they couldn't hide. She researched debt collectors, found ones chasing Sam's trail, $12,000 in credit card debt, unpaid loans from sketchy online lenders, and tipped them off with Ethan's new address, a scrawled note sent from a burner email. "Check 1427 Elm Street, St. Louis. They're dodging you." She imagined their faces, Ethan's panic as the repo men knocked, Sam's indignation as they hauled away her precious silk dresses, a chaos that bloomed in her mind like a dark flower, a balm for the wounds they'd left festering, a justice she could taste on her tongue, sharp and metallic. The divorce finalized 6 months later, Greg's ruthless precision carving her a victory, full ownership of the Toyota, half the savings Ethan couldn't touch, the house sold and split. But it wasn't enough to quench the fire. She used her share to rent a 1-bedroom apartment by a frozen lake in Minneapolis, its icy surface a mirror to the stillness she craved, its shores lined with skeletal trees that stood silent in the winter wind, their bare branches a stark beauty against the gray sky. The apartment was small, but hers. Wood floors she scrubbed clean until they gleamed, a second-hand couch she draped with a thrift store blanket, a shelf of books she read to fill the quiet nights, their pages a refuge from the echoes of Missouri. She'd walk home from the firm through snow-dusted streets, her boots crunching ice, her scarf pulled tight against the wind that bit her cheeks, her breath fogging in the air as she traced the lake's edge, the cold a companion that didn't ask questions, didn't demand she feel what she couldn't. Work at the firm steadied her, blueprints piling up on her desk, a chaos of coffee mugs, pencils, and crumpled drafts, her days a blur of measurements and deadlines that kept her mind from wandering back to the bedroom, to the boots, to the life she'd lost. She'd sketch late into the night, the office empty save for the hum of the heater, her hands steady as they traced lines for buildings she'd never see rise, her focus a shield against the memories that lurked in the quiet. Ethan flipping pancakes on lazy Sundays, Sam's teasing grin as they baked cookies at Christmas, the baby's heartbeat she'd felt in secret, a fleeting pulse now stilled forever. She made a friend at work, Clara, a junior designer with a dry wit and a penchant for black coffee, who'd drag her to a diner after shifts, their booth a sanctuary of greasy fries and late-night talks about nothing and everything. Clara never asked about Missouri, sensing the weight Lydia carried without prying, her presence a quiet tether to the present. 2 years rebuilt her, brick by slow brick, each one laid with Tessa's relentless support, her friend's fierce loyalty a lifeline through the dark. Tessa dragged her to a bar opening one night, a trendy spot called the Timberline, owned by her cousin Nathan. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a beard that softened his sharp jawline, and deep brown eyes that saw too much, piercing through the walls she'd built with a quiet intensity that didn't demand answers. He didn't flirt or pry, just slid a plate of truffle fries across the bar and said, "Happy birthday. Eat." His voice low and steady, a warmth that cut through the chill she'd wrapped herself in. The food was incredible, warm, rich, a balm for her frayed nerves, the kind of comfort she hadn't felt since before the lavender invaded her home, since before the world she'd known turned to ash. He caught her eye later, a quiet intensity in his gaze that didn't demand anything, and she didn't look away. A spark flickering in the dark she'd lived in for too long. Not fireworks, but a slow burn, steady and real. A promise she hadn't known she could still believe in. Their first date came a week later, a drive out to Lake Minnetonka in his pickup, the cab smelling of pine and leather, the radio humming low with an old Johnny Cash tune, "I Walk the Line." Its mournful chords a mirror to her soul, a song she'd once played with Ethan, but now felt new in Nathan's quiet presence. He listened as she unraveled her story. Ethan's betrayal, Sam's smirk, the boots by the door, the t-shirt, the steam, the lies, the baby she'd lost. His hands steady on the wheel, his silence a space she could fill without fear, a sanctuary she hadn't known she needed. "My dad was a cheat, too," he said when she finished, his voice low, rough around the edges, like gravel under boots, worn by years of carrying his own scars. "Ran off with my mom's best friend when I was 10. Left us with nothing but a shitty trailer and a stack of bills. Took me years to stop blaming myself for not being enough to keep him. I get it." That was enough. No platitudes, no pity, just understanding. A shared scar laid bare between them, a bridge built on the rubble of their pasts. They grew close over months, a quiet rhythm forming in the spaces between their lives, a dance of trust she hadn't thought she could step into again. Dinners at his cabin became routine, pasta with sauce from a jar, cheap red wine in mismatched glasses, his laughter a sound that chipped away at her armor, warm and deep like a fire on a winter night. She'd sit on his porch after, wrapped in one of his flannel shirts, the fabric soft against her skin, watching the stars prick the sky over the lake, their light a constellation of hope she hadn't dared to map since Missouri. His arm around her was a steady weight that didn't ask for more than she could give, a presence that anchored her without pulling, a stillness she'd craved but never found until now. His family folded her in. Jack, his older brother, ran the Timberline with a booming laugh and a knack for pouring the perfect whiskey, his hands quick as he flipped bottles behind the bar. Ellen, their mom, brought daisies every Sunday, arranging them in mason jars with a smile that crinkled her gray eyes, her hugs smelling of lavender soap and fresh bread, a scent that no longer stung but soothed. They didn't pity her, didn't tiptoe around her past. They just loved her, scars and all. And it was the first time in years she felt like she could breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest, a lightness that grew with every Sunday dinner, every shared laugh over Jack's terrible puns. Life in Minneapolis bloomed, fragile but real, a tentative new chapter she built from the ground up, brick by careful brick. She moved from the studio to a one-bedroom overlooking a frozen lake, its icy surface a mirror to the stillness she craved, its shores lined with skeletal trees that stood silent in the winter wind. Their bare branches a stark beauty against the gray sky that spoke of resilience, of survival. The apartment was small, but hers. Wood floors she scrubbed clean until they gleamed. A second-hand couch she draped with a quilt Ellen had sewn from scraps of old shirts, its patchwork a tapestry of care. A shelf of books she read to fill the quiet nights. Novels, poetry, anything to keep the ghosts at bay. She'd walk home from the firm through snow-dusted streets, her boots crunching ice, her scarf pulled tight against the wind that bit her cheeks, her breath fogging in the air as she traced the lake's edge, the cold a companion that didn't ask questions, didn't demand she feel what she couldn't yet name. Work at the firm steadied her, blueprints piling up on her desk, a chaos of coffee mugs, pencils, and crumpled drafts. Her days a blur of measurements and deadlines that kept her mind from wandering back to the bedroom, to the boots, to the life she'd lost. Her nights spent sketching until her eyes burned. The office empty, save for the hum of the heater and Clara's occasional company, their laughter over shared fries a lifeline in the dark. Clara became her tether, a junior designer with a dry wit and a penchant for black coffee, her short blonde hair always tucked behind her ears, her hazel eyes sharp with a humor that cut through Lydia's fog. They'd sit in a diner after shifts, a greasy hole in the wall called Rosie's, its red vinyl booths cracked but warm, the air thick with the smell of fried onions and burnt coffee. Clara never asked about Missouri, sensing the weight Lydia carried without prying, her presence a quiet comfort as they traded stories about annoying clients or debated the merits of ketchup on fries. "You're tougher than you look," Clara said once, her voice casual but her eyes knowing, and Lydia smiled. A real smile, not the forced ones she'd worn for years, feeling a piece of herself slot back into place, a shard reclaimed from the wreckage. 2 years and 7 months after the divorce, Ethan crashed back into her world, a rain-soaked shadow at the timberline one October night. 3 years since she'd last seen his face. Lydia was sipping bourbon, the amber liquid warm against her tongue, watching Nathan charm a table of regulars with that easy grin of his hands deft as he poured shots, his laughter a low rumble that steadied her. Ethan's voice cut through the hum, low and hesitant, a ghost she hadn't summoned. "Lydia," he said, his navy coat dripping onto the floor, hands shoved deep in his pockets, like he was afraid to move, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes sunken with a weariness she didn't recognize. "Can we talk?" She didn't move, her glass cold against her palm, the bourbon's burn still lingering, a shield against the past surging back. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat, edged with ice that had hardened over years, a wall she'd built brick by brick. He sat uninvited, the chair scraping against the floor, his hands fidgeting on the table like a nervous kid caught stealing, his fingers twisting a napkin into knots. "Sam and we're done," he said, his eyes darting to hers, then away, unable to hold her gaze, his voice a threadbare whisper. "She cheated. Multiple times. Married guys even. One was her boss at that boutique she worked at. I'm broke. She's a mess. And I'm sorry. For everything." She stared at him, then laughed. A cold, cutting sound that made him wince, his shoulders hunching inward as if he could shrink away from the weight of her scorn. A laugh that carried the bitterness of 3 years distilled into a single sharp note. "You think I care?" she said, leaning forward, her voice low and lethal. each word a blade honed by time, tempered in the fire of his betrayal. "You think I owe you a shoulder to cry on after you screwed my sister in our bed, in our home, while I was carrying your kid?" His eyes widened, a flicker of shock cutting through the guilt that clouded his face, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air on dry land, his hands stilling on the shredded napkin. "Kid? What?" "I lost it," she snapped, her words sharp as knives, slicing through the air between them, years of buried pain spilling out in a torrent she couldn't stop, didn't want to stop. "A month after I left. Stress," the doctor said. "Your fault. Hers. Mine for believing in you, for thinking you meant it when you said forever. So yeah, Ethan, you didn't just ruin our marriage. You took that too. Took the child I carried alone because I was waiting for the perfect moment to tell you, a moment you stole with her. And now you waltz in here expecting what? Forgiveness? Pity?" He swallowed hard, looking away, his fingers twisting together in a knot of regret that did nothing to soften her. His face pale under the bar's dim lights, the lines deeper than she remembered. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice breaking, a crack that sounded hollow to her ears, a plea she'd heard too late to care about. "I'm sorry, Lyd. I didn't mean—" "Don't!" She cut him off, her voice rising, trembling with a fury she'd held back too long, a storm breaking free after years of silence. "You don't get to be sorry now. You don't get to sit there and act like this fixes anything, like a few tears and a sob story erase what you did. You think I owe you anything after what you did? We had something once. 9 years, a home, a life, a future I built with you. Every nail in that porch, every meal I cooked, every dream I shared. And you torched it. You got your fantasy, Ethan, the golden girl, the whirlwind passion, the sister who took what I made and turned it to ash. How'd that turn out?" He stared at the table, jaw tight, rain dripping from his coat onto the floor in a slow, steady patter that matched the rhythm of her pounding heart, a metronome to her rage. "She's living with my parents now," he said, his voice hollow, drained of the man he'd been, the man she'd loved through late-night talks and quiet mornings. "No job, no money, racked up debt I can't even touch. Credit cards, loans, all in my name because she begged me to co-sign, said it'd be temporary, said she'd pay it back when she got on her feet. I've got nothing left, nothing but her mess, her lies." Nathan appeared then, arms crossed, his bulk filling the space beside her like a wall, his presence a quiet threat that didn't need words, his flannel shirt brushing her shoulder as he stood close. "You okay, Lyd?" he asked, his voice calm but his eyes hard, fixed on Ethan with a warning that promised action if she gave the word. His hand resting lightly on the bar, ready to move. She nodded, her gaze still locked on Ethan, unwavering, a steel she'd forged in the fire of his betrayal, tempered by 3 years of rebuilding herself from the ground up. "He's leaving," she said, her tone final, a door slamming shut with a clang that echoed in her bones, a boundary drawn in blood and ash. Ethan stood, defeated, his coat flapping like a broken wing as he slunk out into the rain, the door banging shut behind him with a thud that reverberated through the bar, a period at the end of his sentence in her life, a sound that marked the close of a chapter she'd never reopen. She didn't watch him go, didn't give him the satisfaction of her eyes following his retreat. The bourbon burned her throat as she finished it, but it didn't erase the bitter taste of his gall, the audacity of him showing up like she'd absolve him with a pat on the back and a kind word, like 3 years of silence hadn't built a wall he couldn't climb. Inside, her mind churned. Should I forgive him? Let him off the hook to prove I'm better? Rise above it like they always wanted? Or dig the knife deeper, make him feel it forever, make him pay until the debt's settled in full? Forgiveness felt like weakness, a surrender to his guilt that would chain her again to their expectations, to the good sister she'd been forced to be. But revenge, oh, revenge promised a satisfaction she could taste, dark and sweet, a fire she could stoke until it consumed him, a justice that whispered her name in the quiet of the night. A year later, a letter arrived. No return address, just her mom's loopy handwriting on a cheap envelope, the kind you buy in bulk at a gas station for $1, its edges creased from the mail carrier's grip. Inside was a wedding invite. Samantha Whitlock and Ethan Pierce, June 22nd, Willow Creek Vineyard, Missouri. A glossy photo showed them in a field, Sam beaming in a white sundress, Ethan kissing her cheek, the sun setting behind them in a wash of orange and pink that looked too perfect, too staged, a lie captured in pixels that mocked every tear Lydia had shed. The caption read, "Second chances are real." Taped inside was a note from her parents. "We hope you'll come, Lydia. Sam would love for you to stand with her, just as she stood with you at your wedding. Let's put the past behind us. Love, Mom and Dad." The audacity hit her like a punch to the gut. Stand with her? As what? Her maid of dishonor? The sister she'd stabbed in the back, humiliated, and now wanted to parade her forgiveness like a trophy on a shelf for all their small-town relatives to applaud, a twisted encore to the life they'd stolen? A memory flared, bitter and vivid. Sam at Lydia's wedding 8 years ago, radiant in a lilac bridesmaid dress, raising a glass during her toast at the reception in their parents' backyard, the summer air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and barbecue. "To Lydia and Ethan," she'd said, her voice bright, her smile dazzling the crowd of cousins and neighbors under strung-up lights, her dark hair catching the glow as she beamed. "The perfect couple. I'll always be here for you both." The guests had cheered, clinking glasses, and Lydia had hugged her, tears in her eyes, believing every word, blind to the rot already festering beneath Sam's charm, the seed of betrayal planted even then, waiting to bloom in the bed they'd shared. Now that toast was a lie, a prelude to the theft of her life, and they wanted her to clap for the encore, to play the good sister one last time while they danced on her grave, their second chance, a slap to every wound they'd carved into her soul. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She walked to the kitchen, lit a match with a trembling hand, and burned the invite in the sink, watching the flames curl around Sam's smiling face until it warped and blackened, the ash crumbling into the drain like the remnants of their bond, a funeral pyre for the sister she'd once loved. Then she opened her laptop, logged into her new Facebook, created after she'd ditched her old life, and blocked every family member she could think of, her fingers moving with cold, methodical precision. Her parents, her aunts, her cousin Jenny, who must have leaked her address, sealing the wall she'd built around herself with steel and silence, a fortress no plea could breach. But revenge flared brighter, a blade honed by their gall, sharper than ever, a fire that demanded fuel. She pulled up her reckoning folder, drafted a letter, 2 pages of venom detailing Ethan's cowardice, Sam's betrayal, the baby they'd cost her, every lie and theft laid bare in stark, brutal ink, her words a scalpel cutting through their facade. She addressed it to 20 guests on the invite list she'd tracked online. Old classmates, distant uncles, the pastor who'd married her and Ethan, neighbors who'd toasted their union, and mailed 10 copies the week before the wedding, letting their second chance choke on the truth in front of a select audience. their lies exposed in black ink on white paper, a chaos she watched unfold through whispers on a local Missouri forum, smirking as posts flared with shock. "Did you get that letter? Is it true?" Life with Nathan grew roots, a quiet strength she leaned into, a foundation she hadn't thought she could build again. He proposed a year after Ethan's visit, under a sky blazing with stars, kneeling on their back patio with a simple ring in a velvet box, the air crisp with the promise of fall, crickets chirping a soft chorus that wove through the night. "I want you beside me forever," he said, his voice rough with emotion, his hands steady as he held hers, calluses brushing her skin from years of hauling lumber, fixing engines, rebuilding what his father had broken. She said yes before he finished, her hands cupping his face as she kissed him, tears blurring her vision. Not from pain, but from something new, something whole that she hadn't thought she'd find again. A love that didn't demand her silence, her sacrifice. Their son, Miles, arrived the next spring, red-cheeked and loud, a perfect chaos that filled her days with sticky hands, sleepless nights, and a joy she hadn't known she could still feel after all she'd lost. His dark curls, a mirror to Nathan's. His giggle, a sound that drowned out the echoes of Missouri. A melody she'd play on repeat in her heart. They moved to a small house near the lake, its cedar siding weathered but sturdy. A wraparound porch where she'd sit with Miles, watching him chase fireflies as dusk painted the sky in purples and golds. Nathan built a swing set in the yard, his hands deft with a hammer, his laughter mingling with Miles's squeals as they tested it. The creak of the chains, a new soundtrack to her life. She'd sit with Ellen on Sundays, sipping tea while Miles napped on a quilt, listening to stories of Nathan's childhood, how he'd rebuilt their family after his dad left, hauling firewood at 12 to keep them warm through Minnesota winters, his hands rough even then, his resolve a quiet steel she'd come to love. Jack taught Miles to toss a foam ball in the bar, laughing as it bounced off his own head, his booming voice filling the timberline with a warmth that drew her in. The bar a second home, where she found laughter again, a lightness she'd thought lost forever. Its wooden beams and flickering lights, a haven where she could breathe, could be. But the past wasn't done with her. It clawed back, relentless, a beast she couldn't outrun. Calls started 6 months after Miles' first birthday. Unknown numbers, voicemails piling up like debris after a storm, each one a splinter in her piece. "Sam's sick, Lyd. Kidney failure," her mom sobbed, voice cracking through static, a sound that dragged her back to Missouri's humid nights. "She's dying. She needs you." Then Sam, frail and hoarse, barely audible over the hum of hospital machines. "I need you, Lyd. You're my only match. Please, I'm begging." Lydia deleted them, her thumb swiping with detachment. But they kept coming. Texts, emails, a barrage of guilt trips that clawed at the edges of her sanctuary, threatening to pull her under. A package landed on her porch one gray afternoon. No return address, just a plain brown box with her name scrawled in black marker. Inside were medical records detailing Sam's stage 4 kidney disease, charts of failing organs, desperate notes from doctors. A locket Lydia had given her at 16, polished to a mocking shine, a photo of them as kids tucked inside, smiling on a swing set in their old backyard, and a typed letter. "You're my sister. I've hurt you beyond repair, but I'm begging you to save me. I don't want to die." She stood over the trash can, hands trembling as she dropped it in, the locket clanging against the metal bin like a gunshot, its echo a call she refused to answer. But Sam's voice broke through one night, her thumb slipping on the screen as she chopped onions for dinner, the knife clattering to the counter as the call connected. "I'm sorry, Lyd. I was awful," Sam rasped, her voice a ghost of its old confidence, broken by coughs and shallow breaths that rattled through the line, a sound that pierced the quiet of her kitchen. "I know I don't deserve it, but please, I'm dying, and you're my only shot." Lydia didn't respond, her finger hovering over the end button, her heart pounding as Sam's plea hung in the air, a weight she didn't want to carry. She hung up, hands shaking, the onion's sharp scent stinging her eyes as she stood frozen, the pot simmering on the stove, a distant hum against the storm in her chest. Nathan found her there, steam rising from the pot, onions scattered across the counter, her face pale as she stared at the wall. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice steady, his hand warm on her shoulder, grounding her as the room spun around her. "I need to see her," she said, resolve hardening through the tremor in her voice, a decision forged in the fire of that call. Not to help, to end it, to close this for good. She flew to Missouri 2 days later, leaving Miles with Ellen, whose hug lingered as she whispered, "You're stronger than they know," her gray eyes soft with a pride that steadied Lydia's nerves. The flight was a blur of turbulence and recycled air, her hands clenched around the armrests, her mind a battlefield of memory and resolve. Sam was a husk in St. Charles General, yellowed skin stretched tight over bones, sunken eyes flickering with fear and desperation, tubes snaking from her arms like vines tethering her to a life slipping away, her once vibrant hair dull and brittle against the pillow. Her parents hovered, her mom sobbing into a wad of tissues, her face blotchy and red, her dad staring at the floor with a clenched jaw, his silence heavier than words, a presence that once commanded, now diminished by the weight of their choices. The doctors confirmed it over 2 days of tests, blood draws, scans, consultations in sterile rooms that smelled of antiseptic and despair. Lydia was a perfect match. "We can save her," one said, a young guy with too much enthusiasm, his clipboard clutched like a trophy, his voice bright with hope she didn't share. "Your compatibility's a miracle. Textbook perfect. We should move fast. She's got months, maybe less. Fluids building up, her heart struggling." Lydia sat in the hospital waiting room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of flies, her mind a storm of conflicting voices battling for dominance, a war she couldn't silence. "Should I save her?" one voice whispered, soft and pleading, tugging at the threads of sisterhood she'd once cherished, a bond woven through years of shared rooms and secrets. "She's family. Blood matters, doesn't it? What if I'm the monster for letting her die, for holding this grudge when she's begging, broken, at my mercy? She's my little sister, the one who clung to me during thunderstorms, who cried when I left for college. Doesn't that count for something?" A memory flashed. Sam at 12, braiding Lydia's hair before a school dance in their cramped bedroom, her fingers gentle, her laugh bright as she said, "You're gonna kill it tonight, Lyd," her eyes shining with a love Lydia had thought eternal. They'd been close once, hadn't they? 2 girls against the world, sharing dreams under blankets with a flashlight, plotting a future where they'd always have each other. But then the darker voice rose, cold and unyielding, a steel forged in the fire of betrayal. "She doesn't deserve it. She fucked your husband, stole your life, cost you your child. Why should you bleed for her now? Give her your body when she took everything else." Forgiveness is a lie they sell to keep you weak, to keep you the good sister who bends until she breaks. Expose her, ruin her, or walk away and let her rot. It's justice, not cruelty. She chose this. not you." The moral tangle gnawed at her. Save a betrayer who'd shown no remorse until death knocked, or protect herself, her peace, her right to say no? Society screamed forgiveness, the noble path, the martyr's crown, but her soul demanded justice, a reckoning for the years she'd lost, for the child she'd buried alone, for the trust they'd shattered without a backward glance. What kind of person am I if I save her? What kind if I don't? The questions looped, relentless, tearing at her resolve, a storm she couldn't quiet. On the third day, she called them all into Sam's room, her decision forged in the sleepless hours of the night before, a blade tempered by memory and pain, sharpened by the clarity of what she owed herself. The doctor lingered by the door, scribbling notes on his clipboard, his pen scratching like a countdown to judgment. Her parents sat in folding chairs that creaked under their weight, her mom's sobs a constant drone that grated on Lydia's nerves, her dad's face a mask of tension, his hands clenched on his knees. Sam lay propped up in bed, her breathing labored, a monitor beeping faintly beside her, its green line jagged and weak, a lifeline fraying with every pulse. Lydia stood at the foot, arms crossed, staring at the wreckage of her sister. A woman who'd once been vibrant, manipulative, unbreakable, now reduced to a fragile shell clinging to life, her eyes pleading in a way they never had before. "You know what it means to be someone's only shot at living?" she asked, her voice quiet but sharp, cutting through the sterile air like a scalpel, its edge honed by years of silence. Sam nodded, tears spilling down her gaunt cheeks, her lips trembling as she struggled to speak, her voice a rasp that barely carried. "I do now," she said, coughing, her hands clutching the sheets, her nails bitten to the quick. "I'm so sorry, Lyd. I know what I did. I know I destroyed you. I was selfish, stupid. I don't deserve this. But please—" "Good," Lydia interrupted, stepping closer, her boots clicking on the tile, a sound that echoed like a gavel in her ears. She took Sam's clammy, trembling hand, the skin cold and paper-thin under her fingers, and leaned in until their faces were inches apart, her voice dropping to a whisper only Sam could hear, low and lethal, a verdict delivered without mercy. "I'm your only chance, and I'm not giving it to you." Her mom lunged forward, knocking over a chair with a clatter that echoed off the tiled walls, her hands grasping at Lydia's arm, nails digging into her skin through her sweater, her voice shrill and breaking into a wail that pierced the room. "Lydia, no!" she screamed, tears streaming down her blotchy face, her eyes wild with desperation. "You can't do this. She's your sister. She's dying. She's all we have left." Lydia wrenched free, spinning to face her, her voice rising to a steel-edged roar that silenced the room, reverberating like thunder against the sterile walls, a fury she'd held back for too long. "You all chose this," she shouted, her hands shaking with the force of her rage, her breath ragged as years of pain poured out. "You chose her over me every goddamn time. When she fucked my husband in my bed, when you begged me to forgive her like it was my fault, when you sent that fucking wedding invite asking me to smile and clap for her while she paraded my pain like a prize. You burned every bridge, every tie, every shred of trust I had, and now the fire's here, burning you instead. Deal with it, live with it, choke on it." "She'll die," her dad barked, breaking his silence, standing abruptly, his face red with fury, fists clenched at his sides, veins bulging in his neck, his voice a growl that carried the weight of a man who'd never faced his own failures until now. "She deserves to," Lydia said, her voice dropping to a cold, steady calm, final as a judge's gavel striking wood, a sentence carved in stone. She dropped Sam's hand, letting it fall limp against the sheets with a soft thud, a sound that echoed in her ears like the closing of a coffin lid, and turned to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob, her back to them, her shoulders squared against their pleas. "Contact me again, any of you, and I'll make sure you pay for it. I'll sue you for harassment, drag your names through every court I can find, hire investigators to dig up every dirty secret you've got. And trust me, I'll find them, every lie, every shame. I'll bury you in legal fees, ruin what's left of your pathetic lives until you're begging for mercy you won't get. Test me." She didn't look back. The hospital doors hissed shut behind her, the humid Missouri air hitting her like a slap, thick with the scent of rain and regret, heavy on her skin, a weight she shook off as she stepped into the parking lot. She didn't drive straight to the airport. She couldn't, not yet. Her mind too raw, her heart too loud. She needed space, silence, something to drown the echoes of her mom's sobs, Sam's rasping pleas, her dad's shout ringing in her ears like a gunshot through the quiet she'd fought to claim. She found it in a grimy diner off Route 94, a relic with cracked vinyl booths, flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed incessantly, and a jukebox that hadn't worked in decades, its glass smudged with fingerprints from hands long gone. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a smoker's rasp, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, didn't ask questions, didn't hover, just brought her a cup of black coffee and a plate of oversalted fries, her apron stained with years of grease and coffee spills, her silence a gift Lydia didn't know she needed. She sat there for hours, staring out the grease-streaked window at a flickering gas station sign across the road, the neon buzzing like her thoughts, faint and half-dead, its red glow pulsing in the dusk like a heartbeat she couldn't feel. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, missed calls, texts, a voicemail from her mom screaming, "You're killing her! How can you live with this? You're her sister!" A cacophony of guilt she didn't open, her thumb moving with mechanical precision to delete them all. The screen a blur of notifications she didn't care to decipher, their voices a noise she'd silenced long ago. Inside, her mind wrestled, a brutal tug of war that refused to let go, a storm she couldn't quiet even in the diner's stillness. "Did I just kill her?" one voice whispered, soft and trembling, laced with a guilt she didn't want to feel, a shadow of the sister she'd been. "She's dying, begging, and I walked away. Am I a murderer now? A cold-hearted bitch who let her sister rot when I could have saved her? What if I'd said yes, given her the kidney, proved I'm better than them, risen above it like they always wanted? Wouldn't that make me whole again? Heal the part of me they broke?" A memory flickered. Sam at 8, clinging to Lydia during a thunderstorm, her small body trembling against hers under a blanket as lightning cracked the sky, her voice a whisper. "You'll keep me safe, right, Lyd?" She'd promised she would, hadn't she? Held her tight until the rain stopped, a vow etched in the dark. But then the darker voice surged, fierce and unyielding, a steel forged in betrayal's fire. "She killed herself years ago, when she took Ethan, when she smirked in your face, when she tagged you in that photo like it was a joke, when she cost you your child. She doesn't get your mercy, your body, your life. Not after she stole it all, not after she laughed while you bled. You didn't kill her, you just refused to save her. And there's a difference, a line you draw for yourself, not them. She chose this, they all did. Let them burn in the fire they lit. Revenge felt hollow now, a victory without triumph, its taste dulled by the years, but forgiveness felt like surrender, a betrayal of the woman she'd fought to become, a chain she'd broken free from. "Walk away," the final voice said, steady and clear, a beacon through the storm. Let them drown in their own wreckage. It's not your burden, not anymore. She sipped the coffee, cold and bitter, and chose that path, the one that left her free, her hands steadying as the decision settled into her bones. She flew home that night, landing in Minneapolis as dawn broke over the tarmac, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, a quiet promise of something new, a horizon she could claim. Nathan and Miles were waiting in the terminal, Miles toddling toward her with a gummy grin, his arms outstretched, babbling, "Mama!" in his high-pitched squeal, his dark curls bouncing as he stumbled into her legs. Nathan's steady presence pulled her in tight as he wrapped her in a hug, his flannel shirt rough against her cheek, his breath warm as he whispered into her hair, "You okay?" His voice a low rumble that anchored her, his hands firm on her back, a strength she'd come to rely on. "Yeah," she said, and meant it, her voice soft but sure, a weight lifting, not with a bang, but a sigh, a quiet unraveling of something she'd carried too long, years of guilt and obligation and pain she'd never asked for, a burden she'd finally set down. She scooped Miles up, his small body warm against hers, his sticky hands tugging at her hair, and kissed his forehead, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and milk, a tether to the now. Sam died 6 months later, her passing a whisper on the wind Lydia didn't chase. An obituary arrived, mailed anonymously, a scanned clipping from a small-town Missouri paper, the ink smudged at the edges like it had been handled too much, a relic of a life she'd left behind. Samantha Whitlock, 34, passed peacefully after a lengthy illness. Survived by her parents, Robert and Diane Whitlock. No mention of Lydia, no mention of Ethan, not a trace of the chaos they'd sown, the lives they'd shattered, a silence that felt like a victory she hadn't sought. She kept it, not for grief or nostalgia, but as proof, a tombstone for the past, a marker of the end she'd written herself, a chapter closed by her hand. Ethan vanished, rumors trickling through Clara, whose cousin still lived in St. Louis, that he'd skipped town under a mountain of Sam's debts, $20,000 in credit cards, loans he'd co-signed, a car repossessed in the dead of night, his name a curse on the lips of collectors who'd never find him. Her parents sold their house 8 months later, moved somewhere south, Florida maybe, or Georgia, Clara guessed, and faded into obscurity, their calls and letters stopping cold, their voices silenced by her refusal, a void she didn't mourn. Lydia didn't care where they went. They were ghosts, and she'd stopped haunting herself with their shadows, their absence of freedom she wore like a second skin. A daughter, Avery, joined their family the next year, tiny and fierce, born with a shock of dark hair and a laugh that stitched up the last of Lydia's scars, a melody she'd play on repeat in her mind forever, a sound that drowned out the echoes of Sam's pleas, of Ethan's excuses. They moved to a small house near the lake, its cedar siding weathered but sturdy, a wraparound porch where she'd sit with Miles and Avery, watching them chase fireflies as dusk painted the sky in purples and golds, their shrieks of delight a symphony she'd built from the rubble. Nathan crafted a swing set in the yard, his hands deft with a hammer, his laughter mingling with Miles' squeals as they tested it, the creak of the chains a new soundtrack to her life, a rhythm of joy she'd earned. She'd sit with Ellen on Sundays, sipping tea while Miles napped on a quilt, Avery cooing in her lap, listening to stories of Nathan's childhood, how he'd rebuilt their family after his dad left, hauling firewood at 12 to keep them warm through Minnesota winters, his hands rough even then, his resolve a quiet steel she'd come to love, a strength mirrored in the man who'd chosen her, scars and all. Jack taught Miles to toss a foam ball in the bar, laughing as it bounced off his own head, his booming voice filling the timberline with a warmth that drew her in, the bar a second home where she found laughter again, a lightness she'd thought lost forever, its wooden beams and flickering lights, a haven where she could breathe, could be, surrounded by people who saw her, not the ghost of who she'd been. Years later, a letter slipped through the cracks. An old friend from Missouri, Claire, who'd once babysat her and Sam, chasing them around the backyard with a water hose on humid summer days. Her laughter a distant echo Lydia hadn't sought. It was short, scrawled in haste on lined paper. "Your mom's sick. Lung cancer, I think. She keeps asking for you. Says she's sorry, wants to see you. Thought you should know." Lydia read it once, her coffee growing cold on the kitchen counter, beside a pile of Miles's crayons, Avery's scribbled drawings taped to the fridge, then tossed it in the trash with the eggshells and junk mail, the paper crumpling with a soft rustle. Its words a plea she didn't owe an answer. She didn't owe them a damn thing, not her kidney, not her forgiveness, not her presence at a bedside to ease their guilt or absolve their failures, not a single piece of the life she'd rebuilt from the ashes they'd left her in. She'd paid enough, bled enough, lost enough, her trust, her child, her past, and she was done carrying their weight, done bending to their demands. The next morning, she took Miles and Avery to the farmer's market, the air crisp with fall, leaves crunching under their sneakers as they darted between stalls, their laughter a melody that drowned out the ghosts. Miles picked out a pumpkin too big to carry, grunting as he dragged it to the car with stubborn determination, his small hands red from the effort, while Avery smeared apple cider on her cheeks, giggling as Lydia wiped her face with a napkin, her tiny hands sticky and warm against Lydia's skin. Nathan laughed, snapping photos on his phone, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his voice teasing as he said, "We're gonna need a bigger trunk," his arm slipping around her waist as they walked, a steady warmth she'd never tire of. The Timberline staff greeted her like family when she dropped by later. Jack with a bear hug that lifted her off her feet, his laugh booming through the bar. Ellen with a bouquet of daisies she pressed into Lydia's hands with a smile, her gray eyes soft with pride, her voice a whisper, "You're home here." No one asked about Missouri. No one tiptoed around her past. They just loved her, as is, their warmth a balm she'd never take for granted, a home she'd built from scratch, plank by plank, heart by heart. That night, lying in bed with Nathan's arm draped over her, his breathing a steady anchor in the dark, Miles's soft snores drifting from down the hall, Avery's crib creaking faintly as she shifted in her sleep, Lydia thought about the girl she'd been, the one who'd trusted too much, loved too hard, broken too easily under the weight of loyalty she'd mistaken for duty. The girl who'd let Sam take and Ethan lie because family was supposed to mean something, supposed to hold. That girl was gone, buried under the ashes of a life she'd refused to reclaim, a life she'd walked away from without a backward glance, her footsteps firm on the path she'd chosen, a path she'd carved with her own hands. She didn't forgive Sam, didn't mourn her, didn't need to. Forgiveness was a gift she didn't owe, a currency she'd stopped trading in, a chain she'd broken free from with every step she'd taken since that sun-drenched Tuesday. Family wasn't blood. It was a choice, and she'd made hers, here, now, with the people who'd earned it, who'd seen her scars and stayed, who'd built her up instead of tearing her down, their love a quiet strength that didn't demand her silence, her sacrifice. Some lessons don't come gently. They crash through your world with a wrecking ball, shattering everything you thought was solid, leaving you to sift through the rubble for what's worth keeping, what's worth fighting for, what's worth building anew. Lydia's story wasn't about revenge, though it burned bright in her hands, a fire she'd stoked and let blaze. She'd sent those letters, tipped those collectors, watched their empire crumble from afar, a justice she'd claimed without regret. It was about boundaries, hard, unyielding lines drawn in blood and tears, lines she'd carved with her own strength, her own will, lines that said no more, not again, never again. It was about family, not the one you're born into, forced to love through obligation and guilt, but the one you build, the one that chooses you back, that proves itself in quiet moments and steady hands, in the creak of a swing set, the warmth of a quilt, the laughter of children who'd never know the shadows she'd walked through. And it was about peace, not the kind you're handed on a silver platter, a cheap consolation prize for bending until you break, but the kind you fight for, tooth and nail, through the dark and the doubt, until it's yours, undeniable and whole, a peace she'd won with every step, every refusal, every choice to live for herself. Lydia closed her eyes, the sound of Nathan's heartbeat steady against her back, Miles' snores a soft hum, Avery's crib a gentle creak, and slept without dreaming of them. Not Sam's smirk, not Ethan's excuses, not her parents' pleas, just silence, pure and unbroken, the sound of a life finally, fully hers. Some debts can't be paid with forgiveness, she mused, a truth carved from the ashes of betrayal, a lesson etched in the steel of her spine. What about you? When trust shatters, do you rebuild or walk away? Share your story below. Let's reflect together. Don't miss more. Subscribe, share this tale, and catch the next chapter on Revenge Story, Graceful Revenge. See you in the Graceful Revenge.